Between 2022 and early 2023, I made a series of monthly movie reviews titled SS5's Movie Memories. In that series, I looked back at some of my favourite childhood movies, or adolescence movies in the case of this diamond jewel, and went over what I loved, tolerated, and flat out despised about these movies. When I looked back on this series a while ago, two things crossed my mind. One, I definitely want to redo it someday, and two, there was one franchise in particular that, when I went and revisited it a few months after the series completed, I couldn't get over the fact that I didn't include it. Which franchise am I referring to specifically? Well, The Lion King is, in my humble opinion, Disney's magnum opus, and my absolute favourite movie of all time. It's actually amazing how this silly movie about talking animals has had such a remarkable impact on not just Disney's history, but movie history as a whole. This was a movie I watched over and over and over again as a child, but as time went on, I slowly became a bit burnt out on the franchise, and stepped away from it as I revisited some other childhood movies, and experienced movies I never got to during my childhood, like Madagascar. Then out of nowhere, in May of last year, I suddenly became really hooked on the franchise again, and, as I said, really started to regret excluding this franchise from SS5's movie memories. So today, we'll be straying away from the stupid trains with faces, and talking about the other thing I enjoy: animated movies. So, come along with me as we journey back to 1994. 30 years ago. Jesus Christ. I bloody loved The Lion King as a child. I owned the film on VHS and watched the hell out of it. My year 6 teacher must have picked up on my love for the movie because for our end of year production, we performed it. I was Zazu, if anyone's wondering. I was really looking forward to rewatching the movie for the first time in goodness knows how many years I spent avoiding it like the plague. And when I finally did come back to the movie, man, I regretted ditching it for so long. So the plot of The Lion King is that a lion cub named Simba, voiced first by Jonathan Taylor Thomas and later Matthew Broderick, is set to become the new king of the Pride Lands, superseding his father, Mufasa, voiced by the late James Earl Jones. However, Simba's sadistic uncle, Scar, voiced by Jeremy Irons, plots to assassinate Mufasa and seize the throne for himself, which he ends up succeeding in doing. Simba flees from the Pride Lands, where he comes across a meerkat named Timon, voiced by Nathan Lane, and a warthog named Pumbaa, voiced by Ernie Sabella. Sorry, the script weren't good enough, I just had to do that. Who convinced Simba to forget about his past struggles. This new lease on life for Simba lasts well into his adulthood, until a reunion with his childhood friend Nala, voiced first by Niketa Kalam, I do apologise if I butchered that, and later by Moira Kelly. Nala explains the current situation in the Pride Lands, but Simba, still choosing to ignore the past, insists on not returning, resulting in the two falling out. Soon, Simba begins to learn the error of his ways, and, with help from Rafiki, voiced by Robert Guillaume, I do apologise if I butchered that as well, he becomes motivated to fight Scar and take back the Pride Lands. Where the truth of Mufasa's death is revealed, Scar is attacked and killed by his hyena cronies, and Simba assumes his rightful title as King of the Pride Lands. What an ending. So let's first go over the movie's most fascinating aspect. Its animation. The Lion King's animation is just wow. I can't think of a better word to describe it than wow. The best part of the animation has to be how they nailed the animal anatomy absolutely precisely. It's not just the fact that they nailed it, but also how they nailed it. Not only did the crew visit the African savannah to study the wildlife, but they brought in both a lion cub and a full-grown lion for a life drawing class, so the crew could properly observe and study how these animals looked, moved, and interacted with each other. Another thing I greatly appreciate about this movie is how entrancing the world is. The locations for the film are just so breathtaking and vibrant. I adore the attention to detail in all aspects. The animation for this movie is definitely some of Disney's finest, and just leaves me saying, wow. So the animation for the movie is one thing, But another great strength this movie has is its characters. All have such strong personalities and are all very fun to watch. Even the antagonists have an undeniable degree of charm. I love how each and every one of them is integral to the plot in some way. While it may not seem like it, each character has a crucial role to play. Another thing I really love about the characters is the stellar voice performances for each of them. Some of my favourites include Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella as Timon and Pumbaa respectively. They both give off a certain energy of a comedy duo which I really adore. Jeremy Irons had no right to go as hard as he did for Scar. And of course, the stellar performance from Mr. Bean himself, Rowan Atkinson, as Zazu. I think my favourite out of all of them has to be the late James Earl Jones as Mufasa. His deep, booming voice really gives off a level of experience and mentorship the likes of which I've never heard before, which I really like. I'm sure it's been said 1,000 times before, but animated characters are their voice actors, and this movie is an excellent example of that. One thing I really admire about this movie upon this most recent viewing is Simba's character journey. Simba really goes through quite the trial in this film. He starts off as a cheeky, eager scamp. He gets a mega ego upon learning he'll be king one day, so big that he thinks he can gallivant off to places he's been forbidden from visiting because he's so brave, only to be humbled by Mufasa later, and is made to realise that he's not as limitless as he believes. He enters his lowest, most vulnerable moment in a scene we'll cover in a moment. Upon meeting Timon and Pumbaa, he tries to throw his past behind him, before realising he's very much forgotten his purpose, and with some help, he takes it upon himself to face the past and regain his position. All of this and more are why I firmly believe Simba is one of, if not the best Disney protagonist. His journey as a character is gradual, effective, and incredible. Now let's go over the most infamous scene in this film. Mufasa's death. This is the death scene of all time. After an exhilarating action scene, we now transition to a more somber scene, showcasing Simba in his most vulnerable moment. This scene always made me tear up as a kid, and by God it still does to this day. God, that part where Simba cries out for help before weeping, understanding the gravity of the situation, I'm just tearing up right now thinking about it as I write the script. There's also two aspects that make the scene sting even more than it already does. The first of these is that in the literal last scene we saw Simba and Mufasa interact, they seemed closer than ever before. So to have them torn away from each other like this is just so heartbreaking. The other aspect is that, well, the villain actually won. Scar not only succeeded in the assassination, but also in gaslighting Simba and making him leave the Pride Lands to fully accomplish his goal. This scene just hits all the boxes in creating a phenomenal, emotional scene. I love it. And of course, we need to cover the songs. These musical moments are part of why The Lion King is such a well-known movie today, and for good reason. All 5 of them, written by Elton John and Tim Rice, are some of the best Disney songs out there. Circle of Life is such a grand introduction to this universe and characters, and also serves as a perfect end piece for the film. I Just Can't Wait to Be King is such a cheery little bop I could listen to all day. Be Prepared speaks for itself in terms of being an absolute god-tier villain song. Hakuna Matata, while the weakest song of the movie, is still perfectly good, and of course is nowadays recognised as the flagship song for the Lion King franchise. And then there's the legendary Can You Feel the Love Tonight? If you've never heard this song before, then what the actual fuck are you doing here? Please pause the video now, listen to this song, and then come back. No other love song can quite top the majesty of this one. Seriously, if you're fed up with some of the admittedly not too great movie songs out there, then be prepared to be blown away by these ones. Just like everything else that's phenomenal in this world, The Lion King is not perfect. I do have some issues with it, with some of them just being little nitpicks. First of all, remember how I praised the movie for how it nailed the realistic look and feel of the animals present? Yeah, well, I'm afraid they peaked at the beginning in that aspect. Don't get me wrong, the characters do still feel real, but the animals only really looked real in, like, the first part of Circle of Life. and then midway through the song they forget they're being realistic and go for a more stylized look with these long-ass mouths and bulgy eyes. Like, just look at Timon compared to these meerkats at the start. Again, while I love how the animators achieve the anatomy of these characters, their appearances are rather inconsistent from time to time. And spoiler alert, it's not going to get any better in future Lion King media. Second off is the lack of any sort of implied passage of time. That's not to say there's no passage of time at all, but the scenes of Simba in the elephant graveyard and the stampede just seem to take place within the span of like 2 days. Yes, it's a movie, I'm not supposed to think about things like this, but yeah. I can't help but wonder every time I watch the film. And last of all is Nala's big reveal in the second half of the film. First of all, what are the chances that Nala would just happen upon the exact jungle where Simba is hiding? Also, I feel like they didn't do the best job at implying it was Nala. Like, sure, she pinned Simba like she did earlier in the film, but still. This could literally be any other lioness, only for it to just so happen to be Nala. That's it. Those are literally the only problems I have with this film. This movie is absolutely incredible. It has pretty much everything you could ask for in an animated movie. Charming characters, stellar animation, a story that delivers a brilliant character arc and can emotionally move you, and some really catchy, ear-infesting songs. Truly Disney's magnum opus. And my absolute favourite movie of all. It's a no-brainer that The Lion King became an instant powerhouse movie for Disney, going on to receive worldwide acclaim and 2 Academy Awards for Best Original Score and Best Original Song, specifically for Can You Feel the Love Tonight? So of course, Disney simply had to make an encore in some way. What could possibly go wrong? 4 years after the release of the first film, along came the direct-to-home media sequel to this beloved film, created by our lovely friends at Disney Toon Studios. If you're unaware of Disney Toon Studios, more specifically if you've never heard of this division before its demise in 2018, this was Disney's go-to division for direct-to-home media shovelware. These were the masterminds behind such masterpieces as The Little Mermaid 2, Pocahontas 2, Beauty and the Beast 2, Dane Cook the Plane 2, and of course, The Lion King 2. This movie was quite an anomaly to me as a child. I knew a second movie existed thanks to the Lion King 1.5 trailer at the start of the Finding Nemo DVD, where the film was labelled as The Lion King 3 for some reason. From that, I knew a second movie had to exist, but I just never saw any sort of material connected to it. Then one fateful day, I was in my local CEX, and I happened to stumble across the second movie. I watched it, and I thought it was a serviceable follow-up, nothing more, nothing less. I'd only ever watched the film once before making this video, and now, rewatching it a second time? I'll be damned, it's actually quite good. Obviously not as good as the original, but still gets the job done in terms of being both a good follow-up and a good movie. So let's begin with the plot. The plot of The Lion King 2 takes place directly after the events of the first movie and focuses on Simba's newborn daughter, Kiara, voiced first by Michelle Horn and later by Neve Campbell. One fateful day, whilst out and about, she ventures into the Outlands and meets another lion cub named Kovu, who you may recognise as my gopher in the Stewart Studio, voiced first by Ryan O'Donoghue and later by Jason Marsden. Kovu comes from a rival pride of lions led by the malevolent Zira, voiced by Suzanne Plachette, who plans to assassinate Simba as revenge for Scar's death so Kovu can become the new king since he was chosen by Scar. Kovu gets roped into the scheme, and while committed to the goal at first, he and Kiara end up falling in love and he no longer wants to partake in the scheme. All hell breaks loose when Zira finds Simba and Kovu alone, and Kovu is accused of planning an ambush and is exiled from the Pride Lands. Kiara can't let this happen and so sets out to find Kovu, and both return to the Pride Lands to set things right, which ends up resulting in Zira's watery death. I think the first thing to note about the movie is its new characters. This is a common complaint about this film, but it's established out of nowhere that Scar had a crew of lions that respected him and followed him, despite them being nowhere to be seen in the first film. Last I checked, the only cronies Scar had were his hyena accomplices. Of course, you could make the argument that some of the lionesses present when Scar seized the throne eventually warmed up to him and found a respect for him, but then again, they never imply it in the first film, or even show anything that proves this theory to be correct. So in the end, these characters don't make that much sense and feel like they were just pulled out of the writers' arses. However, does that mean these characters are bad personality-wise? No, not at all. The new faces have just as much charm and strength as the old ones. Kovu is of course a lovable guy roped into the wrong side of the conflict, even though he may not seem like it at times. Zero is a rather great antagonist. You can tell her voice actress, Suzanne Plachette, was just having a ball voicing her. Nuka might just be my favourite of the newbies in the film. Just this pathetic, jealous, pratty brother character who got the most laughs out of me. But then there's Vitani, who didn't really do that much and pretty much just served as Nuka's sidekick. But she's still a good character. As for our returning favourites, Simba is fine. It's nice to see how much he's adapted into his role as king, sticking to Mufasa's way of ruling no matter what. Though I think I would have preferred it if he had just a little more screen time than what he was given. Like, for a movie called Simba's Pride, Simba pretty much only appears in just under half of the movie. Rafiki is fine, and has his own little moment which we'll cover soon enough. Nala and Zazu were rather sidelined and didn't have very much to do in this movie at all. And I hate to say it, but I feel like the movie was a bit too over-reliant on Timon and Pumbaa this time around. Like, they're still the same comedic duo we all know and love, and they do still have the little moments. But one, their comedy was kind of dialed up to 110, and two, they just appeared far too much compared to the first film. Like, we gotta have the two fan favourites play much larger roles this time around, right? Now let's talk about our leading lioness, Kiara. She's a pretty solid protagonist, all things considered. I like how she sort of reflects Simba with how independent she is and everything, and I like that it's her who brings Simba down to earth in the infamous scene where Kovu gets exiled. There's not too much else to say about her in this movie, I don't think. Sadly, Elton John and Tim Rice didn't return to compose the original songs for this movie, so that obviously means the songs in this movie aren't as good as the songs from the first film. Is that the case? Well, yes and also no. I think the only song I was really singing along to in this movie was the first song, He Lives in You. This song is definitely the best this movie has to offer. It's a wonderful opening piece to welcome us back into this world. Fun fact, this song was actually used in my Year 6 production of The Lion King during the scene where Mufasa motivates Simba to remember who he is. As for the other songs, Simba's ballad, We Are One, is a nice little song, and it shows, not tells, that he's really grown as a character since his last escapade. My Lullaby is a perfectly fine song, and is actually the best song in the visual department. Upendi is a solid love song, and by God, Rafiki has some serious pipes. Not One of Us is plain awesome, nothing more, nothing less. And Love Will Find a Way is, while the weakest of the three main love songs this franchise offered us over the years, a serviceable, heartwarming song. Although, were they really that afraid to have Kiara and Kovu actually sing the song, or are they just ventriloquists? As I said earlier, this movie is not as good as the first one. I went over why with some points, but there are some more that drag it down a bit for me. Some of them are admittedly just nitpicks, of course. First of all, and I completely understand why this is the case, but yeah, the animation kinda took a hit in this movie. You can absolutely tell that this was from one of Disney's low-budget divisions by how janky and stiff the characters' movements can be throughout. The anatomy nailing is still there, though again, we have the issue of realism clashing against stylized looks. Secondly, and this is just a nitpick, but I'm not a big fan of the voice acting in this movie. It's mostly good, but that very much only applies to the new characters. The returning voice actors didn't sound as into it as the previous film, sadly. And then there's the fact that Rowan Atkinson didn't return for this movie, so they had to hire a sound-alike for Zazu, Edward Hibbert. I don't want to be too hard on his performance in this film, as he does a fine job, but still, you can absolutely tell there's someone different voicing Zazu. And lastly, the score. Don't get me wrong, the score is pretty good, and I can respect that they wanted to branch out and do their own thing, but I do feel like a bit of instrumentation from the first movie would have been appreciated. While this movie may not be as praised as its predecessor, much less talked about for that matter, I do still think it's a rather solid sequel to a classic. They had every right to just make a cash grab follow-up and call it a day, but they mostly managed to make a pretty good movie. Even with the elements that don't make sense and the slight overuse of Timon and Pumbaa, this is still a perfectly fine sequel. And honestly, as the final film of the franchise, I think it bowed out very well. Oh, never mind. Unlike The Lion King 2, this was the sequel to the franchise I at least properly knew existed, thanks to the trailer played at the start of the Finding Nemo DVD. Honestly, I was intrigued, but didn't pay too much attention. Many years later, I eventually started seeing a few clips from the movie and seeing the rather warm response it's been getting from critics and YouTubers alike. Earlier this year, I eventually managed to get my hands on this movie. Before making this video, I had never seen the movie prior, not even when I picked up the DVD back in April. So this was my very first time watching the movie, and after this very first watch, I came out not really knowing how to feel. This is a bit of a strange one. It's unlike anything I've ever seen this franchise do, for better or worse. Strap yourselves in. So this movie's plot is kinda weird because it sort of has one and sort of doesn't have one. It begins with a little backstory showcasing Timon's beginnings, how he was an outcast, how he didn't fit in, blah blah blah. You know where this is going. He sets out to find a new life, and after an encounter with Rafiki, he sets out to find what's beyond what he can see. On the way, he meets Pumbaa, and the two become friends. Okay, I'm on board for a Timon and Pumbaa origin story. Then the movie decides it wants to be, what if Timon and Pumbaa were involved in the first movie before their introductory scene? I'm not joking, the next few scenes are literally just take a scene from the first movie but shove Timon and Pumbaa into it. That's what the movie provides us for the next 15 or so minutes. Then we see a bit of when Simba joined their ranks and what sort of loony hijinks they got up to. Then we get more of first movie but insert Timon and Pumbaa into scenes they weren't in originally. Then we get more Timon and Pumbaa friendship stuff. Then we get even more first movie with Timon and Pumbaa crap. And then a happy ending with Timon's family, and that's it. I think from that mega long summary of the plot, we can determine the first problem this movie has. It's so muddled up. The way the movie goes back and forth between all these plots is just insane. This feels more like episodes from that Timon and Pumbaa TV show crammed into a movie. Yeah, remember that Timon and Pumbaa show from the 90s where they go all over the fucking place and just have the wildest scenarios that are completely unlike anything the movies would do? Yeah, this feels exactly like that. Granted, they're a bit more restrained with what they can do since they have to stay true to the groundedness of the universe, but it's still just a bizarre viewing experience, and not necessarily in a fun way. Then we have Timon and Pumbaa in this movie. Don't get me wrong, I do still enjoy them for the most part, but I feel like this was when Timon and Pumbaa were really starting to overstate their welcome. Again, they're not bad, and I do really like what they did with Timon, but yeah, they do feel very forced into a movie where they don't exactly belong. And it really gives off, hey look at us, we made a movie with the funny fan favourite characters! On a much more positive note, let's go over that little plot Timon has at the start. This is probably one of the strongest parts of the movie for me, showing how Timon was very much a reject who didn't belong, and his sweet relationship with his mother, voiced by none other than Marge Simpson herself, Julie Kavner, and how he eventually came across Pumbaa and the two's friendship began. This would have been just perfect if it was the plot of the whole movie, but alas, it wasn't. Then there's this movie's humour. Let's just say it's very hit and miss. Like, there were plenty of scenes that had me in stitches, including the moments with our Lord and Saviour himself, Uncle Max, voiced by the late Jerry Stiller. I do really enjoy the cinema segments throughout the movie. Even though it becomes total madness in the final segment with this Infinity War-ass crossover, these segments are still very charming and funny. Two things I think are major steps up from The Lion King 2 are the animation and the score. 2000s era Disney had some really good traditional animation, and this movie is no exception. Even if it was done by a low-budget studio, this is still the cleanest looking movie in the entire franchise, except of course for the moments where they briefly jam in stock footage from the first film. The score is also very good. If you complained about the lack of first movie motifs in the second movie, well, it seems Disney Toon Studios heard you because some of the first movie's score is back, baby! It is rather infrequent, as the majority is made up of all new score and little to none of the score from the second movie, but it is still nice to hear the moments when the original soundtrack does pop in. While we're on the subject of the music, let's finish this segment by talking about the new songs. Dig a Ton of Dance is a bop and a half, and one of the rare instances of a Lion King song being addictingly catchy rather than a grand song to sing along to. And that's all I need, the only song in this movie to be written by Elton John and Tim Rice, seeing as it was recycled from a cut song from the first movie, is a really fun, cute, and visually inventive song. This is honestly a rather mixed bag of a movie. There's plenty to love about it, but also a lot to be desired. A fine Timon and Pumbaa movie, all things considered, one I don't necessarily want to revisit as often as the previous two movies. Well, there we go. What a thrill ride that was. While there's literally no debate as to which movie in this franchise is the best of them all, the others are great in their own rights as well. I really enjoyed coming back to these movies and discovering that my love for them, the first one especially, never left me the way I left them. Even if Disney are rapidly reducing the franchise to doo-doo with a garbage live-action remake and a prequel to said remake that no living and breathing soul asked for, we still have the magnum opus that is the original animated franchise. Truly, Disney's finest work. Now, the wide-eyed bunch of you may have noticed that I have neglected to talk about something else the franchise did. Well, there's a big reason for that. I have purposefully shied away from talking about this other piece of Lion King media, because I'm saving it for its own video. I have a lot to say about it, and it'll be one hell of a video when I finally get around to making it. So needless to say, we shall be returning to the Pride Lands very soon.